afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Section 1 with your host, Stefan Ramkisoon.
And Kyle Taklal Singh.
Glad to have you with us today,
Once
and
more,
let's have a healthy discussion on some serious topics.
as we make our way to Christmas,
Festive season.
festive season.
A lot of craziness going around with shopping.
Yeah, well,
Black Friday sale.
we actually heard the Minister of Health telling everyone that they can't have family gatherings. It's going to be a different Christmas.
They're gonna be a different
Christmas. And to get over, I suppose he has his concerns.
Yeah.
I am concerned about his the liberal way or the flippant way in which he's treated people's right to enjoy their private premises.
Yeah,
People's
last
right.
time I checked, there are certain rights guaranteed by our constitution.
Well, yes, that as well. It's a good thing you're checking often.
Yeah.
Clearly, some people aren't checking that often.
Clearly.
Yeah.
But we will have some discussions on that. This show, Kylie would know. Recently, we had a situation where some Venezuelans tried to enter into our country. Illegally, they tried to enter.
That was a big issue this
It was a
weekend,
big
yeah.
issue where they were then escorted back into the waters, and then they came back in
But most importantly,
while a court action was on.
while a lawyer, I believe it was Ms. Nafiza Mohammed,
Correct.
filed court action under habeas corpus.
On the habeas corpus.
Habeas corpus action, I believe.
So what we decided, ladies and gentlemen, is that we're gonna spend today's show discussing the majority of the show, the forum and the deposition, discussing the refugees, the refugee status, illegal immigration. We have with us today in the deposition Ms. Denise Pitcher, an executive director from the Caribbean Center for Human Rights. We have a little change up in the show today. Ms. Pitcher have some commitments, and to facilitate it, we're going to do the deposition before the forum. So we're going to have her on about 5:15. She will discuss all of these situations regarding the Venezuelan immigrants, asylum seekers, refugees. What are the difference? Because when you look at some of the comments, Kyle, I mean, it's being skewed one way. When you look at some of the comments from ministers, I'm not going to call names of ministers, it's very inflammatory.
It's always going to be a divisive issue.
Of course it would.
On one hand, you have people concerned about our economic health and well-being in Trinidad, our ability to support refugees, migrants, socially displaced people coming from Venezuela, asylum seekers.
Yeah.
We know, I mean, you would have to be blind not to know what is happening in Venezuela. We know the situation there. It's anarchy, it's social upheaval, poor social conditions. Majority of people, a lot of people are going hungry. A lot of people don't have access to basic
amenities, food, shelter, water.
So that obviously, and with their proximity to Trinidad, they're going to be trying to get across to Trinidad. Some time ago, it was about 2 years ago, our country embarked upon a registration process.
We registered about 16,000 people.
Whether or not that sent a signal to people that, look, it was okay to come to Trinidad, that's another issue.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think that it was intended to that. It may have been the unintended consequence of that.
So we're gonna discuss that on both the deposition with Ms. Pitcher.
Yeah, it is
and
the point being, it is a divisive issue.
Correct.
You're going to have strong views on either side. What we need in a sovereign democratic state, Stefan, is to have mature conversation about it, mature debate about it, and let us have opposing points of view.
And not only by those in charge. I mean, the general public
No,
as well.
well, yeah, debate often starts within society.
Correct.
Within the nook of the citizens, often in little enclaves, intellectual enclaves. The parlor, the rum shop gets into the family home, it gets into school, it gets into offices, and it trickles up.
Trickles upwards.
Trickles up, I would say, right? Permeates into the political realm, and now we
and
have
hopefully into some sort of policy.
being a political discussion, a political discourse that really is dominating society.
Yeah. So we're gonna talk about those things in the deposition and the forum.
Certainly, yeah.
And but I want to remind our viewers.
We have a guest from Living Waters, right?
No, it's Ms. Pitcher. That's
Ms. Pitcher from Human Rights.
Yes,
Human Rights, yeah.
So she's the executive director of the Caribbean Center for Human Rights.
Well, it would be interesting to get the human rights perspective.
Correct.
On it,
Correct. So once we have that I want to remind our viewers that we are live on Facebook, right? As well
Send
as
your
live
comments.
on TV. Send your comments.
Let's get your divisive views or non-divisive views.
So we want an engaging conversation today. We're gonna spend the latter part of the show, reading out the comments, taking calls, having that engaging premise, and so that we can engage with you guys.
Don't be shy. We won't call names if not necessary. We could say a caller says.
Yeah,
of
right.
course, if you're okay with us calling your name, indicate that.
Yeah.
You know?
So we'll have those discussions. But Kyle, this week, well, earlier last week, we had the Attorney General on a certain TV program saying certain, I mean, I would say inflammatory things. It's another divisive issue.
Well, we don't have to say certain. We could say what he said.
So he said essentially. So this is all stemming from, in local parlance terms, in the young people's world, they said the Valsain Zessa party. It was really the wedding of two individuals. A very
Stefan, you didn't leave early to get down to some wedding sometime last week. I can't remember.
No, boy.
Okay.
No,
I hope not.
I wasn't there. I was with you until about 7 o'clock planning.
Yes,
but what the Attorney General indicated is that they are bringing legislation to seek to enter your premises or private property without a warrant to deter these super spreader events. And as I said, it all stemming from two weddings that happened last week or 2 weeks ago, where it was publicized. And
to be fair, I think it's been exacerbated by the Zessa phenomenon in whatever part of the social spectrum that these parties take place on. But I think there have been issues in the past. We saw a prosecution fall on. One of our guests, Ms. Renuka Rambajan, was actually the lawyer for the defendants, and that case fell apart. She obviously is doing her job too well. Yeah. Right?
But you have those divisive views because you have on one end of the spectrum, you have where you have the quote-unquote Zessa party where 250 people were held, and then it was later indicated by the Commissioner of Police and different policing organizations that they were all going to be charged. Then you have some that...
And then there was also the issue with a house with a pool party.
With a pool party.
With a pool party. And then you had,
the wedding.
The wedding. So there are events that are taking place in private premises that are of concern to the government. They have termed it, I believe, super spreader events. Stefan, I don't know what a super spreader event is. I don't think it's either a medical term, an anthropological term, a sociological term, or a legal term. Certainly not. I have never heard it. Maybe the learned Attorney General could inform us on it. The point being, if you're going to draft legislation to that effect, it's going to be very controversial. It's going to be constitutionally offensive. It will infringe constitutional rights. That isn't a situation where you aren't sure. It's certainly not legislation that should come through regulation.
He makes no bones about it. He said, look, we are bringing legislation to ensure that police or police officials can enter your premises without the need for a warrant.
Well, just to contextualize it, the law does allow at this point for police to enter into premises without a warrant in very limited circumstances. What you call hot pursuit laws, essentially. For instance, and not to get overly technical, if Stefan is a policeman and he's chasing down a bandit and a bandit runs in private premises, you aren't going to see Stefan run to a justice of the peace to get a warrant before he enters into your house. Obviously not, for purely practical reasons. Similarly, if a policeman sees in private premises someone pulling out a gun about to shoot somebody, he isn't going to run down by the nearest magistrate to swear an affidavit to get a warrant to come back. And the law quite sensibly allows for that.
Correct.
I suppose what they're going to do is contextualize it and say that if police see some event taking place in private premises,
they're allowed to go in.
You see an event taking place, you see people perhaps without masks, without adhering to social distancing protocols, and really presenting a risk of the spread of the coronavirus, that the police similarly ought not to have to go through the
process of
obtaining a warrant to enter into the premises to make arrests and enforce the law.
It will be controversial either way.
It's going to be controversial because while that may be the justification side, it is always open to abuse. It is always open to overreach by the police. It is always open to misuse. It might not be intentional abuse. It might be misuse. We saw a video recently on Facebook, Stefan, I don't know, it was circulating, where a man was arrested for not wearing a mask. And he was actually manhandled into that situation. And while I don't want to make any comment on the facts of it, obviously, but there's a clear situation where law could be used in an oppressive fashion.
Mm-hmm.
And while the law might have good intention, it could be abused.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. And that's why legislators have to be very careful, especially when you're balancing constitutional rights with societal needs, or the needs to fight a health pandemic, or the needs to preserve security, or any other need that the parliament or the legislature or the executive might see fit.
You see, when these events happened over the past 2 weeks, so the pool party, the wedding, and then the Zesta party, right? There were discussions within the public domain. Society was discussing on a whole being unequal treatment, and it's something I think, well, the government has to look at. One of the ministers, I believe, I can't remember who now, it may be, I subject to correction, of course, it might have been the Honorable Minister of Health, said, look, we are no longer given a bly to these private house parties.
And you see, it is that unequal application of the law that has sparked some social outrage on the way in which the law has been enforced. And I think this move to enact legislation is the unextinguished embers of that discontent earlier. Basically, what you had was an inflamed position in society. That has not been quelled because there is still a sense of injustice among people. That,
inequality.
Look, why are you coming after X part of the population and not enforcing it against Y part of the population?
That's the point. That's
right?
the point.
And that leads to discontent and social, a sort of apathy towards, or uncaring attitude towards law, the rule of law and enforcement of law.
And that's why we always say that law cannot be, it has to be clear. No, not only that, it has to be clear. I mean, it goes without saying that the law must be equal. But it must be
applied.
Equally applied throughout the board. And in instances here where there may be some sort of there may not be clarity in the law, then you have society at large discussing what is happening, why are they targeting X and not targeting Y, and that is the problem that we're having right now. And we need hopefully we should have some clarity with the law that's coming up, and we will definitely be discussing that.
Well, we'll have to look. I will definitely have to take an entire session and go through that piece of legislation.
100%. So it's 5:15. We're going to take a very short break. Miss Pitcher is online, and we will be back to discussing the refugee crisis with her.